This is the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless, a weekly podcast hosted by Chris Milson, a podcast to help break the stigma of mental health and to remind everyone that it is okay to be not okay, and to remind those that they are never alone. Please also note that Chris is not a psychologist or psychiatrist and is speaking from research and experiences. Trigger warning for those for the possible explicit content and language.
What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris, and thank you guys so very much for tuning in to my last podcast on trauma bonding. I just kind of wanted to keep this theme going. You know, we started with gaslighting with Dr. Deborah, and then the last podcast was trauma bonding. And this podcast, we're going to be talking about family estrangement. It's a term that I never knew I related to. I've heard the term before, and I was never really familiar with it until a fellow group member on the Facebook group reached out to me and kind of asked me about it. And I had an idea of what it meant, and I had an idea of how to cope with it, but I never knew it was a term that basically relates to my, to my situation in its entirety, between family members and friends that, I'm no longer friends with anymore. We're just going to break that down a little bit. And again, I just want to give a shout out to one of my good friends, Sean. The Facebook group today, as of today, is well over 1,600 members. And I'm very excited to talk to my therapist about that number. Luckily, we have a healing session this week. A lot's gone on since the last time her and I spoke. And of course, today I'm rocking my Rest in Peace Chester Bennington shirt because Linkin Park just put out the unreleased track of Lost. And if you guys have not heard that song, if his music does something for you, because I do know there are people that don't really care for Linkin Park, but for me, as many of you know, he was one of my biggest inspirations. And just the mental health community. He spoke through his lyrics a lot better than a lot of us can articulate to try and get out of our soul. So, this new song, even though I'm not in the place that song was basically, what the lyrics describe, I'm not at that place in my life anymore. A lot more healthy mentally wise and emotionally than I was when I was 14, 15 years old. So, anybody who could use that song, anybody who could relate to that song, it is probably one of the most powerful songs I have heard in my entire life. And I think very highly of Chester and, just the message that he spreads. So, again, we're going to be talking about family estrangement today. Let's start with the definition, just in case there are some people who do listen to the podcast that aren't familiar with the term. Basically, it's a suspension of direct communication between relatives, often triggered by a conflict. It includes avoidance or withdrawal from family members or siblings, or just basically the last straw. They've had enough of whatever situation is going on and they want to cut ties. When we dig in this a little bit, it'll start making a little more sense if that definition wasn't very clear. I kind of just wanted to paraphrase it, just to kind of give you a quick definition of it. And, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what exactly family estrangement is. It can be communication breakdown between siblings or extended relatives. This is the one that stuck out for me pretty hard. Adult children cutting off their parents because of toxic behavior such as violence, abuse, or neglect, or feelings of being rejected. Obviously, I've shared my story about my mom and what I've had to do for myself. Who I haven't talked about very much is my dad. My dad, I don't consider him a bad person. I don't consider him at the level of toxicity that I consider my mom, but the feeling of being rejected is something that has always been in the back of my head my entire life with my dad. I always tried to seek his validation for something, and anything that I tried to do in my life, whether it was trying the voice acting stuff, wrestling, and because when I was in wrestling school, when I tore my shoulder in 2016, I believe it was, from wrestling, after I got home from surgery, you know, looped up still from the pain pills they gave me and stuff. The first thing my dad says, you know, I hope the surgery went okay, or are you okay? Can I help you with something? First thing my dad says when we get in the house, I told you this was going to happen. No words of support, no words of encouragement, nothing. And I've had this conversation with extended relatives, and that kind of goes into the communication breakdown of those said extended relatives. It's, oh, well, that's how he was treated growing up, or that's how my mom was to him. And it's just like, I'm at that point in my life where I'm 30 years old, and if I'm treating somebody like dog shit, part of my language, if I'm treating somebody like dog shit, you know, it comes from a place of hurt. You know, I don't intentionally try to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't attack anybody. You know, it takes a lot for me to react to people. You know, I've gotten my emotions in check over the past couple of years, and you know, basically it's gotten to a point where I just don't want to hear excuses. I just want to hear, you know, this is what you could do to avoid this next time, or put up boundaries between you and your dad when it comes to certain conversations, you know. And if I can go back to that 2016 version of myself, the amount of advice I would probably say to me, what I know now, it's just, you know, my God, I it doesn't seem like a real lifetime. You know, every time I talk to Caleb or my brother or anybody about, you know, when I worked at Publix or when I lived in New Jersey, none of it ever seems real because I'm not nowhere near that person anymore. I don't let people walk all over me. I have boundaries between me and my parents. I communicate those boundaries with my parents, you know, and I know a lot of people struggle just putting up boundaries because, oh, well, it's your mom and dad, or it's your brother or sister. You're supposed to love them because they're your blood. No. I'm here to tell you that those boundaries are more important than your relationship with anybody else. Your relationship with yourself should be before anybody else, you know. And for my parent friends that do listen to the podcast as well, there's nothing wrong with putting yourself first either. And I know that's hard because, you know, you got young kids or you got a teenager, whatever, and they have needs, and I understand that. But if you're pouring from an empty cup, they're learning from what you're doing. Oh, well, I got to exhaust all my resources in order to help other people, and I'm meant to suffer for the rest of my life. You know, it's honestly, guys, if you can put yourself first, you know, whether it's once a week, twice a week, self-care, you know, I like to preach self-care to people because without self-care, without that self-love or that self-positive talk, you're going to constantly be in that rut that you keep running around in circles in. And obviously, as a human being, you want to, you know, try and, I guess, avoid that cycle, avoid being a bad example for your kids or your peers or whatever. You know, if you can show that you can put yourself first and then worry about others. I know I'm a very selfless person, and it's not a problem, but I feel I neglect myself more times than not for other people's benefit. And I get hurt a lot because I wear my heart on my sleeve, you know, and not to be graphic, you know, again, at the beginning of every episode, I try to throw a trigger warning just in case, because I know when I talk about my experiences, I get very graphic about it. But I wear my heart on my sleeve, and 9 times out of 10, it kind of feels like that razor blade just going right over my heart every single time. And again, not to be graphic, but that's how I feel because I put my heart into everything. This podcast, the group, my friendships, everything. And I'm not the type of person to ever expect anything from anybody. And this is something that I struggle with every therapy session I have with Jess, is I struggle feeling what I give out to people, if that makes any sense. You know, it's just kind of one of those things where, you know, I try to take care of myself. I've been doing better about it. I've joined the gym and started fixing my diet and everything else. And, when it comes to my parents, sometimes I'll overextend myself just for them. And it gets the best of me. This last week, I had a really bad week because I let my mom again into my head. And, that's a conversation for another time. Then there's also parents cutting ties because they object to a child's dating partner or spouse. I've seen this so many times where people don't talk to their parents because their parents don't like their husband or boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever it is, for whatever reason. And, it's heartbreaking that we live in a world where we try to express, being open-minded, being big on communication, but nobody talks to each other. Everything's a Facebook post, everything's a Twitter post and a hashtag or a TikTok, whatever it is. And you can't even sit down in front of the person that you're with or your parents and tell them how you're feeling. Instead, it just becomes a Facebook post of talking shit about somebody because you don't like them. And then we come to this, family estrangement where you don't know that person anymore because they don't want you in your life or you don't agree on something. Here's a big one. Over the last 3 years, we've had a craze of politics. We've had a craze of the vaccinations. We have had a craze of politics and the pandemic. I didn't mean to repeat politics twice. Sorry. And this world is so divisive and nobody can ever find common grounds on this subject. And I've mentioned before, I refuse to talk about any of these subjects on this podcast, but I'm just going to share my experience without talking about it directly. You can't have a stance opposing to anybody's without it turning into an argument. I've argued with my aunt when I try to be the most neutral person ever and try to be understanding and try to explain where I'm coming from. It's just always you're wrong, wrong, wrong. And same with the vaccination, same with politics, same with the whole pandemic. It's again goes back to what I was saying before. We live in a world of mass communication. We can't communicate to each other without it turning into anger, without it turning into cutting ties with somebody because you don't agree with them or they don't agree with you and it's your way or nobody else's way. And I've lost so many friendships because of that, because they couldn't sit down and have a neutral conversation with me. It's like, oh my God, you don't believe in the same thing I do. I don't want to hear your counterpoint. Don't talk to me. Block. And, it's unfortunate. And as many of you know, grief is not just death. Grief is losing a really good friend, losing the relationship with your brother or sister. I've been grieving what feels like for a lifetime, from Amy to Santi to friends I was friends with for over 20 years, and they just stopped talking to me, and again, don't ever let somebody tell you how to grieve. Don't ever let somebody tell you how to feel your feelings. You feel what you need to feel yourself. With family estrangement, there comes the massive flood of emotions, and more commonly, grief, like I just said, grieving the relationship of your mom or dad, or a really good friend because you guys didn't agree on a political view, or the pandemic, whatever it is. Again, me having a big heart and having so many people just disagree with whatever point, no matter how neutral I try to be, with no matter how I try to word things, and not to cater to somebody else's views, but just to kind of like soften the conversations. Like, listen, you don't have to agree with me. Here's where I stand. It's okay that you feel the way that you feel, 100% valid, but there's no need to attack me because I'm not attacking you. I'm giving my opinion based on what I've researched myself. I've communicated to many of my friends. I don't watch the news. I don't follow any of the politics, nothing. I don't dig into any of that. It's just too much mental exhaustion for me to sit there and listen to death in one broadcast and then, just drug overdoses or whatever it is. It's the news is just so exhausting, and I don't understand how people put so much energy into it. And then you have the feelings of confusion, which I'll put hand in hand with grief, because, oftentimes when somebody cuts ties with you and it's out of nowhere, there was no communication. And that's happened to me plenty of times. And I've felt confused. What did I say wrong? And you're looking through all the messages. What did I say wrong? And it's just an opposing opinion. And then anger, or even being shocked. Anger, I feel like, ties into every piece of mental health struggles, whether it's suicide awareness, whether it's, borderline personality, bipolar. Anger is always there, lingering in one way or another, and it's so hard to put a cap on anger because it's always there and you never expect it to hit you. And then when it hits you, it's like a freight train. Again, confusion and shocked, I feel like, is more or less the same exact feeling. It's just like, I thought we were better friends than that. I thought we had a 15-year friendship that just went down the drain because we didn't agree on one thing. And, it is what it is. So how do you fix those broken relationships? How do you intend on mending a broken tie with a family member or a sibling? So you can examine the role you may have played in past hurts and take responsibility for your own behaviors. And again, this isn't to say that you're the one to blame on this situation, because if you're the mature party in, whatever's going on, it's basically to the point of they need to understand where you're trying to come from and talk like a mature adult. And I know maturity, is just, I don't want to say it's rare, but I feel like in this kind of situation, it's rare because, if somebody's set on their feelings and they don't want to change, and I'll use the example of my parents, they won't change their views on what they believe and how they act and everything else. And you just have to accept that they're never going to change, and establish your boundaries, which that's one of the biggest parts of mending a tie. It's establishing those boundaries for yourself. And, you can choose to have a relationship with that person or not. I keep my mom further than arm's length. I don't tell her too much. If we ever have a conversation, it's hi, how are you? And go about my day, because I don't feel comfortable enough to bring her back into my life and welcome her into my heart, because every time I've given her a chance, she has shown me that she's more interested in bruising more of my inner child and bruising my inner soul and inner peace, because she's not at peace with herself. She's at a constant battle with herself, and she unfortunately is mentally ill to the point of, I don't want to say she doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It's more or less, it's a cycle that she refuses to try and break. It's kind of she's always a victim. She's playing the toxic victimhood, which we've talked about on this podcast before, and it's just everybody else's fault and not hers. So I know where me and her stand in a relationship. I don't want her in my life directly. I will keep her externally and, just further than an arm's length. And that's okay. I felt guilty for a really long time because she's my mom, and, society's like, oh, well, you got to love your mom. You only have one mom, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to tell you, from a person who has heard that for the last 5-10 years of trying to heal, trying to get better, it's okay to cut ties with your parents. It's okay to put up that boundary between you and that parent or parents. I don't really have much of a boundary with my dad because he doesn't really attack me personally anymore. I think since I moved out of the house and just kind of established myself and have a foundation to stand on and whatnot, he doesn't butt into anything I'm doing. He doesn't have an opinion on anything I'm doing, and that's fine. Again, I keep him at an arm's length I'll tell him some things. I don't trust him fully with a lot of the stuff that I struggle with, but we've been getting better. You know, the relationship has gotten better over the years. Forgive or work on letting go of resentment is another one. Resentment is really tricky. You know, it's one of those things where you can't look at that person in the face the same anymore because they abused you or they talked down to you about to other people or neglected you, whatever it is. I know for the longest time I could not look at my mom or talk to my mom because of what happened in New Jersey, because of my attempt in New Jersey and everything else she has put me through. But if you can let go of that resentment, that peace that comes into your heart that follows is so worth I guess trying to mend fences, trying to at least accept the apology you know you'll never get. And I know that's something I needed to tell myself is I accept your apology that I will never receive from my parents. See, the thing with my mom is the amount of times that she has said she was sorry was because she knew I wanted to hear it, but she never meant it because she kept doing it. Same with the love bombing. That was another really big one with her. It's, oh, I love you, I would never do anything to hurt you, or I'm so sorry I said this, I'm so sorry this, sorry that, sorry I treated you like this in the past, and I love you, and blah, blah, blah. I'm your mother, we're family. You know, I've heard it all from her. And every time, every time something goes wrong in this family, and that happens a lot, and she's usually at the center of it. I always feel like a terrible person if I cut her off because, like I mentioned in the last podcast, guys, I don't want to be responsible. I don't. Let me reword that. I don't want to feel guilt if she took her life and I was the last person to cut her off. Um, I know it wouldn't be my fault, and I know that people that are going to commit suicide are going to do it, you know, with or without a certain relationship getting better or worse. I know when I attempted, I had full means to do it. I wanted all pain to stop, but uh, when she has threatened that she wanted to do it, it was because she knew that was a knife she could stick in the right place and twist because I have forgiven her more times than I have cared to admit. And I've given her chance after chance. And now I've finally come to the realization that she's never going to change her ways. She's never going to see that she is the problem, that she needs to get help to actually help herself, you know, because she could see a therapist. And I just don't trust her to have a productive therapy session. When I lived in New Jersey, she saw a therapist. I'll use air quotes on that one. And she basically came home after a couple sessions and she would constantly be like, I went to therapy today and my therapist told me to tell you guys to stop doing this, this, and this. Being in therapy for almost 3 years and, you know, almost a year in New Jersey, I know a therapist doesn't say anything like that. I mean, maybe there's therapists out there that says things like that. I mean, I've had a bad experience with a therapist, but I just can't foresee a therapist telling her to say to her family, "Oh, well, stop doing this, stop doing that." It just doesn't line up. And again, she's a compulsive liar anyway, so you can't really trust anything that comes out of her mouth. Um, Show empathy. You know, don't try to persuade your family member to see things your way. Let go of the need to be right. This is a big one. I know a lot of people that have egos and a lot of people that just won't let go of that hate for their parent or that hate for, you know, a friend that they stopped talking to because they didn't agree on something. And I say friend because I consider my friends to be family. So just an FYI of why I keep throwing friend out there. I consider a lot of my friends family, But, you know, a lot of people just have too big of egos and won't admit that not everybody's going to share their opinion, and it's okay to have a different opinion. Stop trying to convince everybody that you're the one in the right, that they have to think the way that you think, because I don't agree with everything my dad says, and for the most part, we agree on everything. I think he's ignorant in a lot of conversations we have, and I just don't feel the need to try and make him see my way. Just like my aunt, just like my grandma, whoever it is. I don't try to convince people that my way of thinking or my way of seeing the situation is the right way. It's whatever you feel is morally right, whatever you feel in your heart of hearts that this is the right thing for you to do or this is the right way for you to think, go for it. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. Don't tell me how to live mine. And I've told my grandfather that too, because he's heavy in religion. He used to be when I was younger. And now he's very heavily into politics. And every time we have the conversation about politics, it's like, listen, I respect your opinion. I just don't want to talk about it because we're never going to see eye to eye. You base every conversation you and I have off of what you see on the news. And I don't watch the news. I research what I need to research if I'm interested and leave it at that. But I refuse to have a conversation about politics with people that are overly stubborn and feel they always need to be right about everything. So I'm good on all that. So what are the 4 steps of healing in the family estrangement? So step number 1, decide that you want to heal and reclaim your mental health. This is something that I struggled with for a really long time. I remember before I started going to therapy that I just had in my mind that, oh, I don't need to go to therapy. Only crazy people do that. You know, this was when I was really young. And this was my mom wanting to go to therapy with me. And before I knew the red flags of how she was thinking, and before she tried to put me on, I think it was Ritalin she tried to put me on because I was really hyper when I was younger. And again, my first experience with a therapist was a gambling addiction therapist. It was outpatient therapy, and it was horrible. And that was my perception of therapy forever, for a really long time. And after those 2 sessions, I just felt like this is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life. I remember when I had my first breakup in 9th grade, and that was like I guess kind of a trigger to my downward spiral of everything being shit at home. And then at high school, somebody I tried to form a relationship with, 14 years old, you don't know shit about relationships at 14 years old. And you think, oh, well, this is going to be the love of my life. I'm 14 years old and we're happy. We've been together 2 months. And, I don't remember why we broke up. I mean, that was so long ago. But my point being on this conversation is just, I thought it was normal to feel the way I was feeling because it was just always dark. I had a CD player in my pocket all the time. And, I experimented with drugs when I was in 9th grade and always try to find something to cope to. And luckily, I don't want to say luckily, fortunately, I found music, and music helped me get through a lot of shit that I shouldn't have gone through at that age or up until now. There's a lot of stuff I tolerated that I shouldn't have tolerated. I wish I could go back to the day that I started wrestling school and have a backbone because my coach was a bully. And I remember one of our first classes, we were trying to put together a match. And I think we were working on like how to attack a body part and how to make it make sense in the middle of the ring. And I didn't know what to do after I think I was attacking the guy's arm or something, and I didn't know how to make it make sense. And he was just sitting there screaming at me saying, oh, why are you doing this? Why isn't blah, 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 blah. I don't remember the whole argument, but I remember shutting down, and I crawled out of the ring, and I just didn't want anything to do with it because, again, I let people do that to me. And that was around the same time I moved up to New Jersey. And yeah, 3 hours of my mom screaming in my face and calling me every name in the book and telling me I'm not worth shit. I wish I could go back and give myself advice on how to have a backbone, to not let people do that to you. I don't think I would have struggled as hard as I have up until now. Therapy has been a blessing to me, and I'm grateful for it. And I wish I had it sooner than I did, but I'm grateful that I have it now because it gives me something to look forward to. It gives me motivation to push improvement in my life, whether that's gym improvement or this podcast, whatever it is. You have to want to heal. You have to want to reclaim that mental health. You can't just drag yourself through the mud and be like, oh, it's going to get better eventually. You have to make that happen. You have to want to make that happen. Life isn't going to hand you anything, unfortunately. And I wish it did. Hand me $1 million. I'll be okay for a little bit. But I strongly suggest that, if you want to get out of a rut, if you're feeling down, therapy is not for everybody. And I will forever preach that to anybody who will listen. Therapy is absolutely not for everybody. And that kind of goes into going slow, gradual healing. Progress is still progress. It's progress, not perfection. A small step is still a step. Whether it's, you don't have to jump up every single step to get to where you want to go. Every step leads to the same place, and help other people on the way up there too, man. You see somebody struggling while you're trying to climb that ladder, help them get up too. I'm so tired of seeing people that just watch others suffer. I know we all have shit going on. We all have battles that we face, but uplift each other, man. Root for each other, help each other heal. I'm not telling you to stop your life just to make sure somebody else doesn't fuck up, but I'm so just heartbroken seeing the suicide rate climb, in younger age groups too, man. Just quick little story about that. I was watching, not on purpose. I was at the gym and the news happened to be on. And this is what I'm talking about. And they had a story of a 14-year-old girl who was getting bullied at school. And people were just filming her getting beat down in a hallway. And it went all over Facebook, all over TikTok, all over every social they posted it on. The next day, when she saw those videos, she took her life. 14 years old. Age group 10 to 24. Suicide is the second highest killer in that age group. That is not okay. I want anybody who will listen. If you see somebody getting bullied, you see somebody getting mistreated, don't just sit there and record it or do nothing. We got to help each other, man. Like, if you have young kids, please just encourage them to look out for their fellow friends, to look out for their fellow classmates, man, because I don't want to see any more kids, adults, teens. I don't want to see anybody do that, take their life, man. Like, I've been there. I know the feeling of just wanting it to stop and not wanting to suffer, but be kind to everybody around you, and please push that message on your kids. Bullying has gotten 100 times worse than it was when I was a kid. Social media is absolutely disgusting with bullying. So please, if you can find it in your heart to spread that message to your kids, to whoever, please do. Sorry to kind of sidetrack on that. I really wanted to get that off my chest because it was a story that broke my heart, and I hate how casually the news was just reporting it. Get support as you open up old wounds. Addressing your past can hurt you more than you're already hurt. You're feeling that trauma over and over again, and when you start to try and heal, you have to go to your past and you have to hug your inner child and walk them through that fire again. You don't have to do that alone. Again, it doesn't have to be a therapist, because therapy is not for everybody. It could be a friend. It could be a family member that you trust. Whoever you feel that you can trust inside your heart, reach out to them. Ask them to be an advocate for you. Ask them to hold your hand through this journey that you're going through. Now, I will say also, don't expect that person to be available to you 24/7. Healing is, it's a 360. You have to put in the work, as well as whoever is trying to give that advice to you. If you're asking for advice, and if you take it, great. If not, at least trying to put in the work of healing. You can lead a horse to the water, but you can't force it to drink. And that's probably one of the most relevant sayings ever, as old as it is, because you can't force somebody to heal. Your healing journey is about you. Whatever extent your family choose to own up and take responsibility for their behavior cannot prevent you from your inability or in your mental health, and do whatever you need to fully enjoy your life in the future. It's one of those things where the healing journey, it takes so many pieces to put together, so many different things that you have to think about when you're healing. It's, do I want to heal on my own? Do I want to try and get through this on my own? Do I want to reach out to somebody for advice, or, what can I do better? Or do I want to plan this out? Healing it's a long journey, man. I'm still healing from so many things. I'm a lot better than I ever have been, but I still have a long way to go. I still have a lot of things that I struggle with every single day, but it's a sprint, not a marathon. At the end of every podcast, as you guys know, I like to read a quote that I find on today's subject. And thankfully, there was a quote that I found by a Miss Fiona McCool. I hope I'm saying her name right. McCall, I think it is. And it's titled Estranged. And of course, today's subject was family estrangement. So it reads, "It is apparently more palatable to think of all estranged people who cannot or will not reconcile with their families as doomed to suffer in an eternal pit of despair over it, than it is to imagine that some of us quite simply decide to have a good life in spite of estrangement." I think that is probably one of the most powerful things I've ever read on that subject, just because, it shows you where the world's mentality is at. It's so hard for people to swallow their pride and want to repair a relationship with anybody, and healing, quite frankly. A lot of people don't even know where to start with healing. I'm grateful for every single day that I earn. I'm grateful for the support that I have. And, if anybody ever needs that support and wants to reach out to me, please feel free. I will be more than happy to help you. These next couple episodes, I'm shooting for one special guest. She is an artist. Nothing is in stone yet, but she helped do a cover for Linkin Park song called Numb. She's reaching out to her manager to see if we can do this podcast. If we can, I'm very excited for that. We also have a guest from our mental health group. His name is Derek. We're still going over the details on what exactly we want to cover, but I'm very excited to have him on the next episode. We're going to talk about growth and self-care. So again, thank you guys so very much for tuning in this week. I always appreciate your support. Please like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel, and follow me on Spotify. If you want to follow me on Facebook, look for the Mental Health Movement with the logo down in the bottom right of my YouTube video. Thank you guys again so very much. Be kind to everybody. Be well. And as always, be gentle with yourself. Till next time, take care.